Hello everybody, welcome to Books Up Close. My name is Chris Lloyd. I'm feeling well, staying healthy, looking after each other. Welcome to the episode where I tell you everything I read last month. Again, it's a little bit late, but whatever. But I'm going to start with a plug for my poetry pamphlet, which I've talked about before, but it's called Pick Up Your Feelings. You can still buy it online. You can find it in the various places online. 14 Poems is the publisher, and you can buy it directly from them, or it's on Waterstones and other places. But if you are interested, please do check it out. It's got the Scorpio constellation on the front, and it's got some beautiful quotes on the back from some of my favourite writers, including Richie Hoffman and Bridget Minimore and Travis Chewing Lau. So they say it's good, so it must be good. Right. Go buy it, please, if you're interested. Marketing, I forget. I need to do that sometimes. Okay, so last month I read a selection of stuff. I'm going to start with poetry while we're on that topic. I read this beautiful book, I Cannot Be Good Until You Say It, by Sana Asen, and it really is stunning. The book is really, really gorgeous. It's about queerness, it's about Muslimness, it's about gender and family and relationships. The language is stunning, first of all. I love the kind of switches back and forth between English and Arabic. There are poems about the Quran. There are so many things going on in here that ties together the divine and love and the erotic all together in one big mix, and the lines are so gorgeous. There are some beautiful photos in there too. Visually on the page, there's a lot going on. There are some really lovely things happening visually, emotionally. I really highly recommend it. I sat with these for a while. I read them very slowly because these poems in particular demand to be read quite slowly, I think. They're really evocative and full of emotion, and I think you need to take your time with them. So that was a huge win for me. This book is gorgeous. I highly recommend it. That's from Bloomsbury Poetry. The other poetry book I read is Jack Underwood's Happiness, which came out a while ago, 2015. And Jack's poems, I've read a few of them before, but I hadn't read this collection from cover to cover, which is his first collection. And honestly, it's really, really, really good. There are some beautiful poems in here, especially the ones about love and relationships, I think are really good. There's a poem called Happiness, which is a poem, I would never try to write a poem about happiness. That feels way too difficult, ready for kind of cliche, but Underwood does it really beautifully. Yeah, really, really gorgeous poems in here. I highly recommend it. If you like poems that have a great line that kind of turn an image on its head, that quickly kind of reorient you, really subtly done. Gorgeous language. So I'm going to read his next collection when I can. And I've recently read his non-fiction book, so there's more to say about that too, coming up in the next video. I also read some great non-fiction. So this book, Gathering Women of Colour on Nature, which is edited by Jure Showa and Nazia Sawa Skuse. I did a wonderful event with Jure in Cardiff. We both talked about our books, and we had a really interesting conversation about form, about nature, about Welshness, loads of things. It was a really lovely evening, and this book in particular is about different women of colour writing about their relationship to the quote-unquote natural world, right? About nature, about swimming, mountains, walking, rivers. There are so many things going on here, especially about reorienting the white centricity of nature writing, as it might be called. And these essays really kind of like puncture that. Dure's is really gorgeous as an exemplar. There are so many things going on in here. There's stuff about religion, there's stuff about selfhood, identity, queerness, race, ethnicity, belonging, home. Really gorgeous. Keirani Baraka's An Eco Story is probably one of my other favorites. It's kind of written as a poem, a kind of like prose poem. So yeah, highly recommend that. I also read Amina Cain's A Horse at Night on writing. So I'd read Cain's book, which I've forgotten what it's called, Indelicacy, which is a really short snippet of a book. And it's weird, it's set at an unspecified time and place. It's a really good novel, but strange, very strange. And this is her kind of non-fiction book about the writing process, but it really is about more than that. It's her examining other books, other works of art, and thinking them through, thinking about what they've taught her. I hoovered this up on a train journey back and forth to London. I read half each way, and it really set my mind racing with thoughts and ideas. She writes about novelists I love too, like Annie Ernaux and Elena Ferrante and Sigrid Nunez and all these other people. So it really struck me, and I love writers on writing, like that always interests me. And her sentences are so beautiful anyway, you could just read this and kind of swim along with it. So highly recommend that, especially if you are a writer or interested in writing in any kind of way. I then also read this reprint or kind of reissuing of Love's Work by Gillian Rose, who is a philosopher, the sister of Jacqueline Rose, the other philosopher. Two incredible Roses in one family, both startlingly good thinkers. And this is Rose's memoir after she's diagnosed with cancer. And this is 95 pages long. And each chapter is this kind of strange look at different elements of her life. It's not a memoir in I was going to say a traditional sense, but I don't even know what that would be. But it's not as focused as you expect it to be. It's about illness indirectly. She kind of gets to cancer right at the end. It's about relationships. It's about writing and thinking and being in particular places at particular times. It's a very slender book, kind of elliptical in a way. And I feel like I need to reread it because I think I missed quite a lot. It's philosophical in the most interesting kind of way. She's not trying to claim anything, but she is thinking life through. She's thinking the work of love, which she sees as a very kind of capacious idea. So there is so much going on in these pages, in this prose. She's not the same kind of writer as Jacqueline Rose, who writes, I think, quite sharply. Her sentences are very sharp. They're very precise, and I love them for that. Her sentences really cut through, whereas this is a bit more ambiguous, a bit more elliptical, slightly even more lofty in places. So yeah, I wonder if anybody's read this, what you think. Let me know in the comments as ever. I'd love to know what you think. That's Love's Work by Gillian Rose. Then read some fiction. I read Jhumpa Lahiri's The Namesake, which is a really good book. I love Lahiri. I think we've talked about her before. And this is a novel that kind of encompasses a whole life. And again, I don't know how she does this in under 300 pages, but she takes us from the birth of Gogol Ganguly, from while his mum is pregnant in the hospital about to give birth, right up to later in his life. It's about kind of assimilating into Americanness, if that's even the right phrase. Like, he is born in America, but his mum and dad are born in India, and they have to kind of integrate into Americanness, and his mum especially doesn't find herself at home there. He is named Gogol by his father because his father is reading Gogol short stories at a pivotal moment in his life that I'm not going to spoil. And the story really kind of unfurls time, right? It kind of starts at this moment of birth right through to kind of middle age. You don't feel like you're missing out on tons of stuff in between the chapters. It's not like, for instance, the kind of Alan Hollinghurst recent novels, right, where he kind of jumps forward 10 years and you have to piece in the details. She's very good at kind of taking you with you. There's nothing hidden in those gaps. It's kind of just like, here's the next step in this story. It's so readable, so interesting, really beautifully written, so much insight and warmth. She's really interesting character in its kind of fullest sense. I think you want to live with these characters, you believe them, they're very real. Yeah, I highly recommend it. Really, really beautifully written. And I read this book by Joshua Jones called Local Fires, and their stories set in Llanelli in South Wales, which is near where I'm from, and I bought this on my last trip to Wales from the wonderful Queer Emporium, which is in Cardiff. So go to the Queer Emporium if you are there or nearby. They will have some copies of my pamphlet, by the way, as will, if you're in Manchester in the UK, if you go to Social Refuge, they have some copies that are signed, and in some of them there are some special limited edition lino prints, so go find them. Anyway, Local Fires are these stories. They're kind of interlinked. There are some characters and little moments that kind of recur across them, set in Llanelli. It's about really this town that has been neglected and overlooked for so long, especially after the kind of decline of industrial work that's located there and various kind of historical incidents. And it focuses in on different people in this town. It's very immersive. You feel the voices straight away. He's really good at picking up the kind of cadences of how people speak in that place. He is obviously from Llanelli, but still, it's always hard to get that on the page. There are some real standout stories in here. Yeah, I'm not going to say too much because I think there's some really interesting things in there for you to explore, especially if you are from Wales. So this kind of checks off one of my manifestations, or whatever I called them at the beginning of the year, things I wanted to do. So I've read some Welsh fiction, so I'm trying. And I ticked off another one, which I'll tell you about in a minute. Or maybe I'll just tell you about that one now. I said I wanted to read some classics, so I read Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge. Not The Return of the Native, The Mayor of Casterbridge. This is a chunky one, but again, I actually kind of read this quite quickly, surprisingly. I love Thomas Hardy. I kind of like him more than Dickens, actually. Dickens is great, he's great at story, but sometimes we drift off. We learn about every single person in this town. And with Hardy is way more kind of like focused in. He's like, I'm going to give you every thought and feeling and kind of sensation of this person. You're going to know what the hay smells like in this town. You're going to know what it feels like. And this is another great one. I mean, the cover should have given it away. I didn't know it was going to be as tragic as some of his other tragedies. I mean, the later ones are really bleak. I thought this might be in between, but it does get quite sad by the end. There are some real interesting turns. The setup is a kind of poor man and his wife are traveling across kind of Hardy's Wessex with a young child, and the guy is an alcoholic. And when they get to a kind of town fair, he barters away his wife and child. So basically he sells them to another man. And then we fast forward in time. Turns out he is now the mayor of this town, Casterbridge. And yeah, everything unspools from there. And there are twists, there are turns, there are coincidences, there are cycles back around. Hardy loves that stuff, right? Where someone crosses paths, where a letter is sent, but it's not read until after something else happens. And then that opens up more stories. He really layers it on. It's hammy in places, melodramatic in places, but I love that. It's really enjoyable to read. Yeah, this is a really good one. I really like this one. So that's another thing off the list. Not that I'm attempting to just cross them off the list. The intentions I set, I wanted to do. So I bought Hard Times by Dickens the other day, so I'm going to try and read that over the summer as well. Okay, I'll end on a really good book, but this book, which lots of you told me to read, is In Memoriam by Alice Wynne, which won, what did it win? I don't know, it won something. It was on lots of lists. Everyone raved about it. I did not like this book. I did not think it was very good. You're all going to hate me for this, I know, but I'm just going to come out swinging because I didn't think it was that well written. I thought it was quite cliche even. I didn't particularly care. So this is about two guys, really, who meet at a kind of elite boarding school. It's not Eton, but, is up there. And then the war breaks out and they go off to war. This is 1914. And it kind of tracks them as they go their kind of separate ways in the war, and then do they come back together? And they kind of fall in love at school, but one doesn't want to acknowledge it, and they don't want to kind of come out as anything particular, right? They're not labeling their identity. And it's just very much, to go back to Hollinghurst, I blame him for this, not solely, but this focus on white, wealthy, kind of gay people or queer people in this kind of early century. I really don't need more of these characters, right? I don't need more of how wealthy white gays are struggling to come to terms with themselves. That I don't need anymore. I need other queer stories, please. There are thousands of them out there, millions of them out there. I want more of them. Also, not to get into representation, but this is also written by a white woman. I don't know. We've talked before about this. The Great Believers, the Rebecca Mackay book. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that road, but anyway, it's interesting to me that there's a kind of trend of this happening. And war novels generally are not really my thing. I don't know. Is there anything new to say? Is it being said in a fresh way? I don't think this book does that in any kind of sense. I didn't feel for the characters. Lots of friends have kind of said, oh my God, you didn't cry, you didn't feel anything. And I was like, no, I didn't. And then they get PTSD, obviously, like it's terrible. But even the way that's written didn't feel fully lived in to me. I don't know. I thought this was clunky and yeah, not that well written, really. But knowing me, I had to finish it, right? Because who knows what's going to happen. There is a semi kind of twist in the middle that I'm glad I read too, but still, this wasn't the book for me. So sorry, Alice, I apologize, but yeah, I don't know. I think there are other books that are doing more interesting things around that time period. If I'm going to read about kind of queer people and their kind of inarticulable desires, like I'm going to go to Sarah Waters every time, right? Like that's inevitable. So this wasn't for me. Anyway, we'll end on a good one. I'm continuing my Percival Everett journey with this one. It's called So Much Blue. I'm sad I only just read this because it is so, so good. This one came out in 2017, so not super old, but it's told in 3 parts and they're kind of labeled House, 1979 in Paris. And House is the kind of contemporary story, and it's about this painter who is painting this huge canvas in his shed, but he won't let anyone see it. Not his wife, not his kids, not his best friend. He doesn't know if he'll ever finish it. There are some kind of early descriptions in the first few pages of like the size of the canvas and what it feels like, but then that's it. That's one of the storylines. And then in that story, we kind of get these flashbacks. He's remembering a time 10 years before when he has an affair with a young woman in Paris. I'll come back to that. And then a third strand way back in 1979 when he goes to El Salvador with his best friend to rescue his best friend's brother, who they think has been kind of caught up in this drug run or something. So each of these 3 stories kind of get tangled together, and you kind of get a sense, I guess, early on that there are these unspoken things, and maybe that's what the painting is about, right? He's trying to paint these unspoken things. And it's called So Much Blue, so obviously throughout the book you're trying to note any point when he describes something blue, which there are a few little dotted moments. But really, it's a novel about representation, I think, right? That this painting, in the kind of vein of, Wolves to the Lighthouse, where that very end of the book, right, you get Lily painting that final little brushstroke. The novel and the artwork are kind of entwined in this way, and what is locked, what is hidden from us is like the very end of the book. But even that doesn't really unlock everything for you. But it is a really beautifully written, like, Everett can't write badly, like there's no possible way, but this one in particular is great on memory, on desire, on loss. The bits in El Salvador are, at the height of his intense kind of thriller writing, where you're on the edge of your seat, you don't know what's going to happen next. The Paris section is very kind of, it should feel cliche, right? This kind of like older painter falling in love with a young, like 20-year-old Parisian woman. But it doesn't feel cliche somehow. I'm not quite sure how he does that. It feels lived in. It feels full of the mess and complexity of that desire. It doesn't feel shiny, I guess, in that way. And then the stuff in the present with his wife and kids now, and another secret that he keeps from his wife about his daughter, they all get threaded together, and you're kind of constantly switching between these 3 storylines, knowing at some point Everett's going to kind of draw them together, and he does beautifully, interestingly. And yeah, I highly recommend it. If you've not read Everett before, like, it's actually a really good place to start, because it kind of gives you his main preoccupations, I think, about genre, about what the novel can do, about the past, about identity, about art and representation. But it's also about race in certain ways, which I think I'd love to talk to people about if you've read it, where the idea of colour is kind of everywhere in this novel in a kind of literal sense, but colour also then in that kind of racialized sense. Colour is everywhere and points in lots of different directions, right? The idea of so much blue makes us think of like, so much colour is everywhere, but what does it lead to? What does it point to? Where does race lie in certain ways? And we know that the main character is black, but that is not kind of dwelt on in any way. His racialized identity pops up a few times in certain contexts, but other than that, Everett, I think, is slyly or surreptitiously thinking about how race works in the world, especially as a kind of like visual signifier, and then laces that with colour generally in art and all these things. He is just a genius. Go read this book, please. I highly recommend it. Okay, until next month, please let me know what you've been reading. I really do like to know what you're reading and whether you've read any of these books and what you think of them. If you agree with my opinions, let me know. It makes me feel slightly less alone out here criticizing things that other people love. I always think, is it me? But maybe it's not me. So yeah, let me know what you think. And until the next time, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, ring the bell for notifications, comment below, and we'll talk soon. Take care of yourselves.